How are you,
Great,
man?
good. How are you? Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
This is the Steve Clemons Show, a new product of the Atlantic media empire.
Wow.
Great to be with you. Great suit.
Thank you.
Let's talk cancer. You're co-chair of the House Cancer Caucus. What's happening?
We are trying to find a way for the cancer community to communicate more effectively to Congress, because Congress plays such an important role, and we failed badly in our responsibility over the last 20 years. In the 1990s, there were record numbers of levels of cancer research money. About 30% of all grant applications to the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute were funded. That was reduced in the 2000s to about 8%. So not only do you lose...
To how much?
8%. So not only do you lose important research, you lose rock star researchers who decide to leave the field because, there's not a lot of work for them. So, the hard thing about cancer research is this, and this is why we have to find a more effective way to communicate to Congress. The economics of cancer research are awful. They just are. Innovation is trial and error. There's going to be more losses than there are wins. When you win big. So cancer research has to be sustained over a long period of time. A lot of promising new therapies have been in phases of discovery for 2 and 3 decades. But if it's delayed because of lack of funding, then those potential treatments are delayed for people that need them. So we just need to find a much more effective way to communicate. I remember when I was first elected in 2005, the American Cancer Society had a program called the 2015 campaign, the objective of which was to eliminate all death and suffering due to cancer by the year 2015. Obviously, it fell short. But what's most important is you're making progress toward the goal. The whole, all their advocates converged on Washington, and that night, Congress passed a resolution supporting the 2015 campaign and its goals. It passed unanimously. 2 months later, they cut funding to cancer research. So to me, that said that more work needs to be done to more effectively communicate to Congress.
Such an interesting and unexpected beginning to a conversation. I think it's very profound what you just shared, because we've got a lot of the folks engaged in the cancer. What would you advise, given where things are now? Because one I've wondered is cancer and the prevalence. It is the 900-pound gorilla out there. It's so pervasive. Is there a jadedness in Congress that can be overcome by better communication? What would you advise folks here to do to fill this deficit that you've just called out?
I think it's already been done. Keep in mind that 2 weeks ago, the Senate Appropriations Committee, in a bipartisan bill, increased funding to the National Institutes of Health by $2 billion to about $36 billion. That's a 20% increase over the last 3 years. My example that I cited in 2005, that never would have happened. And I think it's attributed to the effectiveness of the cancer community, who are not only having docs and nurses communicate with members of Congress, but the afflicted and those who love the afflicted. And there's no better advocate sitting in a congressman's office than somebody that tells you their story, because the story is all the same, and prevention's important, early detection's important. People don't realize, but less than 10% of cancer deaths are attributed to the original tumor. That's why early detection's important. It's when cancer spreads, when it moves, when it advances, when it metastasizes to a vital organ that you need, that cancer becomes lethal. So that underscores the importance of early detection. Lifestyles, stay out of the sun, and nutrition, smoking, 30% of all cancer deaths could be eliminated if you eliminate tobacco use. 1 in 2 men will develop cancer in their lifetimes, invasive cancer, 1 in 3 women. The prevalence is more for men because they smoke more. So there's some pretty commonsensical things that can be communicated where money can be invested toward the goal of reducing the incidences of cancer.
What is your caucus doing with regards to pediatric cancer in children?
It's a tough issue. As you know, only about 4% of federal funding, research dollars, go to pediatric cancer because it's so rare. You'll have about, I don't know, 11,000, 12,000 new cases this year. Some 1,300 kids will die from pediatric cancer. But good progress has been made. The United States Food and Drug Administration just approved a gene-based therapy for acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is leukemia that afflicts 25% of all those kids that have cancer. And cancer is the leading disease-based cause of death for kids from 0 to 14. So good progress has been made, and it's an amazing thing. You know, 40 years ago, you had three options. You know, you could cut out cancer, literally, by surgery. You could burn it out through radiation, or you could destroy it through highly toxic chemicals called chemotherapy. Now there's amazing breakthroughs in immunotherapy that you know, remove the body's, you know, from your immune system T cells, genetically engineer them, reintroduce them to the body, and those cells can now not only identify but kill cancer cells. And these kids that went through these clinical trials to test both the safety and efficacy of these treatments, it's a drug developed by Novartis, they're showing, they're in remission like 83%. The cancer community is very, very excited about the very promising results, not only from the clinical trials, but the FDA approved this unanimously. I think just showing, you know, the great potential of this new drug for kids, really, for whom traditional therapies had failed.
I was just reading about the Roswell Park Cancer Institute, which I guess is in your district.
It is.
And I was unaware of what a leading role they're playing in immunotherapy approaches on cancer. I guess my question in that, and I know it's received funding, and I know that the funding picture is so important broadly, but there's a broad ecosystem, and you referred to it about, you know, rock star researchers and losing them. What's the health of that ecosystem broadly around someplace like the Roswell Center, and should we be worried about it?
Well, Roswell Park Cancer Institute was the first comprehensive cancer center in America. Chemotherapy was developed there, photodynamic therapy was developed there, critical studies linking, I mentioned before, tobacco use in cancer, and you know, the blockbuster drugs for metastatic breast cancer, Herceptin, trastuzumab is the chemical name, was clinically trialed and tested at Roswell. And Roswell currently has clinical trials that are very promising in immunotherapy. So not only is this gene-based therapy showing great promise for pediatric cancer, for many adult cancers as well. And we're you know, the interesting thing is we're not really looking at where cancer is. It's where its origins are from. So these therapies deal with several different cancers where, you know, 20, 30 years ago, you know, you were dealing with breast cancer, you're dealing with one drug for breast cancer. But, you know, we're learning a lot more about cancer. I always say, and you know, people say, well, you know, you be careful about this. Nobody's ever died from breast cancer. What people die from is when breast cancer, you know, moves to an organ, the brain or the liver, and cancer cells are fast-growing cells, and when they pervade the liver or the brain or some other organ you need to live, they crowd out the healthy cells, and that organ is deemed dead, and you can't, so are you, because you can't survive.
You know, this may be an unfair way to frame it, but I remember when I worked in the Senate in the 1990s for Jeff Bingham, and at that time, Dianne Feinstein was pushing a breast cancer stamp. And it was a stamp that you could go get a postage stamp, and it would kick money into you know, funds for research. And and I thought a lot about this. It was a big issue for us because it raised the question about what about other ailments out there that didn't have a stamp? Was there a zero-sum battle between different cancer therapies? One of the things I've been concerned about in today's forum is you sort of wonder, since we have Child Cancer Awareness Month, whether or not this is sort of the underapproached, undertended part of the cancer thing. And you're so literate in this area. Is it wrong of someone like me on the outside to think that there are these tensions inside the cancer research area that are unhealthy and that need to be fixed? Is there, are there sways in the cancer research attention of the political and the research base that are kind of off where they should be? Or do you have confidence that the entire picture is sort of being fairly processed through, if that makes any sense?
It does. Look, there's always going to be tension in the research community as to, should Alzheimer's be the priority? Should cancer be the priority? Should it be adult cancer? Should it be pediatric cancer? Those problems always exist. But so I don't know. Here's what I do know. That investments to the National Institutes of Health. The National Institutes of Health it's the largest research institution in the world. When we invest big money in NIH and the National Cancer Institute, a subdivision of NIH, we invest in jobs in our communities. You mentioned the clinical trials that are occurring in immunotherapy at Roswell Park Cancer Institute. That's creating jobs. Good jobs that are bringing people from all over the world to Buffalo. And the great renaissance that's occurring in downtown Buffalo is really a result of the growth of a place called the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, which is 9 anchor institutions and 150 companies. The original institution is Roswell Park Cancer Institute. And people want to live near where they work. So there's a residential renaissance occurring in downtown Buffalo. So residential demand, commercial demand, economic growth as a direct result of research dollars. But the other issue is, and I think people understand this, if America doesn't lead in cancer research, there's no leadership in the world. That's what we do. When you look at the things that grow the American economy, it's infrastructure investment, it's educating your people to and beyond the current technology, and it's scientific research. You have a smartphone, and every technology in your smartphone, touchscreen technology, global positioning satellite system, Siri, the ever-pleasant voice-activated personal assistant. It came from research from the federal government. Steve Jobs in Apple, his genius wasn't technology. His genius was design and marketing. The problem is all of our tax dollars paid for that innovation in technology, and all the smartphones are made in China. So we should be smarter about this. The American economy is the greatest public-private partnership in the history of the world. And scientific research is a big, big part of that.
Do you have, I'm trying to think right now, if there was a Republican you, a version of you that I could have such a literate discussion about cancer and what we needed to do. And do you have a partner on the Republican side that you think could do as well as you have done in this discussion?
Well, I appreciate that, but yes, absolutely.
Who are some of your partners?
Leonard Lance is a fellow that on the Republican side who is very articulate and very passionate about these issues. There are a number of members. And the interesting thing is they typically will come from a district that has a comprehensive cancer center in their district. So they not naturally, but over time, they develop.
They get tooled up.
They get tooled up. Very well said.
Well, the other side of it, though, is the cost side. I interviewed even on this stage Peter Welch. So your colleague Peter, who's been engaged, both he's pro-research, but he's also concerned on cost. I know you've also been trying to address some of the cost issues and treatment parity issues. What do you think is missing as we talk about research development? We don't often talk about, it's sort of a detached discussion from accessibility for the average person out there who's got to work their way through cost hurdles that are sometimes pretty dramatic.
Recognizing the reality, as I said, the economics of cancer research suck. They just do. But if you look at private businesses spend a lot of money on innovation, and that is by definition trial and error. There is a lot of waste toward getting to the place you ultimately want to be. And the only failure in cancer research is when you quit or you're forced to quit because of lack of funding. We can certainly get better at it. It can certainly become more efficient, but innovation by definition is inefficient. And to hold researchers to a standard that's unrealistic. As I mentioned, all of these drugs, Herceptin I mentioned before, Gleevix, another one for chronic myelogenous leukemia. All of these drugs were in what's referred to as the pipeline for 20, 30 years. And that's what clinical trials are all about. You test the safety and efficacy of a proposed treatment. And when it doesn't meet the standard that you would hope for and that everybody hopes for, you just got to get back in the lab and just keep working it. So it's to recognize that you can't say, well, over the last 10 years, Congress, we gave the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, a lot of money. We're going to pull back a little bit. That is self-defeating because cancer research has to be sustained over a long period of time. I think both Republicans and Democrats have learned that. And that's as evidenced by the fact that the administration wanted money diverted from really scientific research to border security. And it's just what happened. In Congress, both Republicans and Democrats and the Senate appropriations process said no. Scientific research, cancer research is too important. And they increased by $2 billion 3 weeks ago in the Senate appropriations bill. And that's what we should strive for, to change minds and not appeal to one party or the other, but to all of us as Americans.
I want to go to the audience, but Francis Collins, director of the NIH, have had the privilege of interviewing him a few times. He says exactly what you do about funding and research. It's pretty much identical. I was surprised. Were you surprised when President Trump kept them in place? And is that a good thing?
I think it's a good thing. Dr. Collins has been around, not only with NIH, but NCI. And these folks are passionate about what they do. They have street cred, or lab cred, if you will. And I think that they're in a great position to speak to Congress with great authority.
Were you surprised when the president kept him?
Nope.
Interesting. Let me open up the floor. Yes, right here in the back. We have a microphone going to you. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Dawn Lee Carty from Speak Life. I have a 9-year-old daughter who suffers from...
Just so the folks know in the back, because we have a lot of folks, that mic is not working again. Oh. So I apologize. Got to worry about our video watchers. Here we go.
Good morning. My name is
Dawn. That mic's not working.
No.
Sorry, apologies.
Will my voice project?
Okay,
okay, there we go. Good morning. My name is Dawn Lee Carty, founder of Speak Life. I have a 9-year-old daughter who suffers from frontal lobe epilepsy. She was born diagnosed 6 months into her life. She's been introduced to several opiates for over the years, and the only thing that I found was that my daughter just went deeper and deeper. The seizures never ceased. She would suffer up to 60 seizures a day. 2 years ago, I took a trip out to Colorado and introduced her to CBD oil, and my daughter that went from having 60 seizures a day is now 92% seizure-free. So with that, she's inspired Speak Life, where we are doing a documentary and we're going around and we're speaking life and getting testimonies from cancer patients, epilepsy parents, Crohn's disease. And what I've been finding on our road trip is a lot of people that do suffer from cancer and a lot of people that are finding relief with medicinal cannabis. Was wondering, what is your point of view about it? Also being interrupted with Jeffrey Sessions perhaps wanting to enforce legal action on medicinal cannabis patients. What are your thoughts about medicinal cannabis therapy, and have you seen results?
Thank you.
Well, the states are taking the lead in that. If there is, like anything else, you test something for both safety and efficacy. And if marijuana use for medicinal purposes is effective, that's a decision that should be made by a doctor and their patient.
Mm-hmm. Other questions, comments? If you were to, let me just wrap this up, if you were to try and adjust something in the next session or two that you feel, I mean, it sounds like you're optimistic about funding. I'm sort of interested in what you're not optimistic about, that you think is the boulder that needs to be rolled up the hill, that we in these forums, we as journalists, need to pay more attention to that we're not. What would you give us counsel to do?
Look, I'm a student of government as much as I am a practitioner. I taught history and economics at the college level. I think the debate is in the wrong place. It's about spending, it's about debt and deficit. Debt and deficit is very important, but there's one way to grow yourself out of debt and deficit. It's to grow the economy. There's only one way to do that: invest in your economy. And when you invest in infrastructure, education, scientific research, stop whining about China. They cheat on their currency. Their human rights, their environmental and labor records are atrocious. But stand up and compete with them, because China is doing what America's not doing. They just invested $1 trillion in infrastructure, a lot of money in scientific research, and we're screwing around with the wall. They're opening up, we're closing down. America, as I mentioned previously, is the greatest economy in the history of the world. But the world's very different now. It's web-enabled, it's globalized, it's based on innovation and new technology. It's to begin to change the debate, get away from right and left, and give people the human capital, the tools that they need to succeed. That is a good and just society, and that's the great tradition of America. And don't accept people that say, we got to cut spending here, we got to cut spending. Yeah, look, you got a $4 trillion budget. There's a lot of waste in there. You can't defend the efficiency of a $4 trillion budget. That's what the political process is all about. It's a fair debate to be discussing the extent to which government should be involved and not involved. That's fair. It should be rigorous. It should be fact-based. But I think, starting to focus in on growth of the American economy, which will solve a lot of problems. And, keep in mind here, we've been talking about debt and deficit for a long time, but our economic growth is anemic. It's been below 2% for the past 20 years. China has economic growth of almost 7%, and that's low compared to other years. So I just think that when you look at, like, the 1990s, for example, we had 4% economic growth over an 8-year period, each year over an 8-year period, right? We created 22 million private sector jobs, right? We didn't have a budget deficit. We had a budget surplus of over $260 billion. Guess what else we did during that same period of time? We doubled the amount of funding to the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute. And that's when all the rock star researchers were working. So just be smart about your own future and the future that we are all here and entrusted to for the next generation. And I think Washington gets too stuck in the moment. It's all about the 24-hour news cycle. It's all about the persistent presidential campaign. And it's all about, mucking up the other guy in the short term. But a lot's lost over the longer term. And let's be big game hunters, but let's be long ball hitters. And let's recognize that what we do today should have a lasting and sustained positive influence moving forward for the longer term.
Such an interesting macro frame. Thank you very much for it. I know we're going to want you back. I hope you want to come back.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Brian Higgins, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for